The words landed before Zara could pull them back. 6 words. That's all it took. 6 words delivered across a crowded bar to a man who hadn't asked for her attention, and didn't look like he needed anyone's. The music didn't stop. But something did. She felt it before she understood it, that particular shift in the air when a room recalibrates around a single moment. The people nearest to him had gone still in the specific way of people who know something she doesn't. Who have already run the calculation she hasn't thought to run yet. The man himself didn't move. Didn't react. Didn't even blink. He simply turned his head, slowly, and looked at her. Dark eyes. Absolute certainty. The expression of someone who had not been surprised by anything in a very long time. And the smile that followed, slow, cold, surgical, was not reassurance. It was inventory. Welcome back, fierce hearts and midnight wanderers. Before we go further, if you've ever said something out loud before your brain caught up with your mouth, this story is for you. Because Zara didn't know. She genuinely didn't know. And what happens when he decides that ignorance isn't an excuse, but might just be exactly what he's been looking for, will change everything you thought this story was about. Subscribe. Ring the bell. Tell me in the comments, have you ever talked your way into something you couldn't talk your way out of? Now, let's go back to those 6 words. Zara Osei was not the kind of woman who took dares. She was the kind of woman who analyzed them. Identified the structural weaknesses, declined gracefully, and changed the subject before anyone could apply pressure. She had been doing this since law school, since the first time a study group tried to dare her into something she didn't want to do, and she had produced a 12-point rebuttal of the dare's internal logic so thorough that the person who issued it had looked genuinely chastened. This was not a popular quality in 22-year-olds. It had become, over the following 6 years, the quality that made her the attorney she was. She was 28. Corporate attorney, mergers and acquisitions. Warm, deep brown skin, natural hair worn loose for once. She usually kept it pulled back for work because loose hair felt like a liability in boardrooms where she had to fight for every inch of credibility. And old habits didn't die in a single Friday evening just because Becca had asked her to try. Her entire professional life was built on words chosen with surgical precision. Knowing what a sentence meant before releasing it into a room. Understanding the consequence of language in a way that most people only understood retroactively, after the damage, after the deposition, after the verdict. Tonight, for the first time in years, she had not looked before she spoke. Tonight was Becca's birthday. Which meant 3 glasses of Prosecco and the particular looseness that came from a week of 80-hour days finally releasing their grip on her shoulders, and Becca Flores in the specific mood she got in when she had decided that tonight's entertainment was Zara. The bar was called Cypher. A high-end lounge in the financial district that attracted the particular species of powerful person who didn't need a reservation to get a table, because tables were always somehow available when certain names appeared at the door. Dark wood. Amber lighting so warm it felt like an editorial decision. Jazz that cost more per set than most people made in a week. The kind of place where the ice in your glass had been carved specifically for that glass, and the staff moved with the specific efficiency of people who understood that in a room like this, noticing too much was as dangerous as not noticing enough. Zara usually didn't come here. She went to the kind of bar where the beer was cold and the noise was loud enough to make conversation an act of genuine effort. Becca went everywhere. Becca worked in private wealth management and navigated the geography of money as naturally as breathing, which was why, when Becca chose a venue, you were usually outflanked by the choice before you understood it had been made. There was a man at the far end of the bar. He had not moved in 40 minutes. Not because he had nowhere to be. Because this was where he had decided to be, and the room, Zara could feel it even from across the space, even 3 Proseccos into a Friday she had mostly stopped managing, had organized itself accordingly. 3 of the bar staff had walked past him without making eye contact. Not rudeness. The specific, practiced avoidance of people who understand something about a person that they have decided is safer to not know. Becca had been escalating for 20 minutes. Option 1. Asked the bartender for a recommendation. Easy. Declined. Option 2. Compliment the man in the corner on his jacket. Low stakes. Also declined. Option 3 arrived with the gleam of someone who had found the right lever. Tell him he looks like he's waiting for someone who's never coming. It's just a line, Becca said, and she was laughing, and the Prosecco had done its work, and Zara was funny when she was relaxed, quick, the kind of sharp that made people lean in, and the line was good, she could hear that it was good, and she also had a habit she had not quite performed tonight. She had not scanned the room before she opened her mouth. She didn't know yet why that mattered. She picked up her glass. She walked to the far end of the bar. And she said 6 words to a man she had never seen before in her life, and would never be able to unsee again. The words came out exactly as Becca had scripted them. You look like you're waiting for someone who's never coming. Delivered in the register she used for depositions, confident, crisp, carrying the precise weight she had intended, and no more. She was good at that. She had always been good at that. The attorney's trick of making a sentence sound like the natural conclusion of a thought rather than the beginning of a collision. He looked at her. Not in the way men looked at women in bars. Not assessment, or interest, or the reflexive inventory she had learned to navigate since she was 19. This was something else, the specific, unhurried quality of someone who had all the information they needed and was deciding, at their own pace, what to do with it. The bar had gone quiet in their immediate radius. Not the whole bar. Just a few feet around him. The people close enough to have heard, close enough to have read what hearing it meant, performing the same careful not watching that the staff had been performing for 40 minutes. He was Korean, mid-30s, lean and precise with the specific physical economy of someone for whom every movement was intentional. Dark suit. No tie. A watch that Zara's M&A brain categorized automatically, without asking to, as worth more than her first car. His English, when he finally spoke, was flawless and accented in the way of someone who had learned a language as an adult, and decided to make it his own. He set his glass down. Slowly. Deliberately. Sit down, he said. Not an invitation. Not a request. A reclassification of what was about to happen. Zara's legs, apparently, had not received the memo from her brain that said this was optional. They carried her onto the bar stool beside him with the specific efficiency of a body that has processed a threat faster than the conscious mind has caught up. He studied her face the way she studied deposition transcripts, systematically, looking for inconsistencies between what was presented and what was true. "What's your name?" he said. "Zara." She said it before she could decide not to. "Zara Osei." He did not offer his in return. "What do you do?" "Corporate attorney. Mergers and acquisitions." She watched something flicker behind his eyes, not surprise, just recalibration, the tiny visible adjustment of someone updating a file. "Why? Do you know what I do?" She didn't. And she understood, for the first time since she had walked across the bar, that not knowing might be the actual problem. He leaned forward slightly. Not aggressively. Just enough that the space between them became the kind of space where conversations went quiet and the rest of the world stayed on the other side. "You should have looked before you spoke," he said. Not unkindly. Just factually, in the way of someone delivering a diagnosis. "You're very good with words." A pause. "You have no idea how rare that is in rooms like mine." Zara held his gaze. She was good at holding gazes. It was another deposition skill, the specific, controlled steadiness of someone who knew that looking away first was a concession. She looked away first. He smiled. Not triumphantly. Just noting it. The way you note a fact. She extracted herself with the efficiency of someone who had spent 10 years learning to leave rooms gracefully. Went back to Becca. Dismissed the encounter as interesting, as a story, as the kind of thing you laughed about later. Went home. Lay in bed with the amber light of the city coming through her blinds and told herself that whatever had happened in those 7 minutes, it was finished. It was the last time for a very long time that she would believe what she told herself. At 7 in the morning, her phone rang. Her managing partner. His voice had the specific quality it carried when something had gone wrong at the level where things went quietly, irrevocably wrong. Not a raised voice. Not urgency. The particular tone of someone managing the temperature of bad news. "You need to come in," he said. "We have a new client. He's asked for you specifically." "Who?" He gave her a name she had never heard. A name attached to one of the largest privately held investment vehicles in the city. A name that should have crossed her desk a dozen times in 6 years of M&A work and had somehow, precisely, never appeared. She ran it while still on the phone. The results came back in 90 seconds. She placed the phone face down on her nightstand and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then she got dressed, in the specific, deliberate way of someone preparing for something they don't have a name for yet. The elevator to the 16th floor of her firm had never felt so long. She pushed open the conference room door. The man from the bar was sitting in the client's chair, the chair that belonged to the person who was paying, with a calm that suggested he had been waiting for exactly this long. Not a second more. Not a second less. His eyes found hers immediately. The same unhurried, measuring quality. The same expression that was not surprise, because nothing surprised him, because he had been here, in this precise configuration, since before she walked across the bar last night. The meeting was brief in the way of meetings where one person already knows how it ends. His name, as he gave it to her in the conference room with the same directness he had given her nothing in the bar, was Kwon Dae-young. He was acquiring a logistics company, a mid-size firm that handled freight contracts across the Pacific Rim, legitimate on its face, complex underneath in the ways that logistics companies handling Pacific Rim freight contracts were always complex if you knew which questions to ask. He needed legal counsel for the acquisition. He had selected her firm. He had selected her. The retainer he named made the room feel slightly smaller. Zara asked the professional questions. She was good at professional questions. They were the kind of weapon that looked like courtesy. He answered some of them and deflected others with the practiced ease of someone who had long since identified exactly where the line between disclosure and exposure sat, and who crossed it only when he chose to. "Why me?" she asked finally. Specifically. He looked at her across the conference table in the same way he had looked at her across the bar, unhurried, measuring, already certain of the answer to a question she hadn't finished asking. "Because you walked up to me last night without knowing who I was," he said, "and said the most accurate thing anyone has said to me in 3 years. The room absorbed that. Zara absorbed it. And then the attorney in her, the part that didn't stop running patterns even when the rest of her was managing the specific, adrenaline-adjacent sensation of understanding that the ground had shifted, asked the follow-up question that the first answer had opened. "Becca knew who you were," she said. Not a question. Something moved behind his eyes. Not confirmation. Just the absence of denial. She ran the due diligence the way she ran all due diligence, systematically, with the specific mercilessness of someone who had learned early that the thing a client least wanted found was always the most important thing to find. The logistics company was legitimate. The acquisition was legitimate. The money trail was clean in the way money trails were clean when someone very skilled had made them that way. The difference between cleanliness born of innocence and cleanliness born of craft was a difference Zara could feel in the documentation even when she couldn't yet name it. But the ownership structure, the layers of it, the specific geography of the shell companies and the holding entities and the jurisdictions chosen with the precision of someone who understood exactly which questions each jurisdiction's regulatory framework was designed not to ask. This was not the architecture of a businessman protecting his privacy. This was the architecture of someone who wanted to be unfindable. She called her contact at the U.S. Attorney's office. Off the record. Gave the name. The silence that followed was 17 seconds long. She counted. "Where did you encounter this person?" the contact asked finally. "He's my client," Zara said. Another silence. "Zara." Her contact's voice had dropped to the register of someone choosing words with the kind of care that suggested the words had consequences she didn't want to own. Be very careful. She confronted Becca on the phone. Not in person, because in person, Becca's tears would do what they had been doing since 2015, which was disarm her before she finished asking the question she came to ask. The confession came in pieces. Becca's firm managed money for private clients whose names never appeared in public filings. One of those clients had a request. A specific woman. A specific bar. A specific Friday. The dare was the mechanism. Becca was the vehicle. She hadn't known exactly what he wanted. She had told herself this. She might have even believed it. But she had known enough to know that knowing enough was already too much. I'm sorry, Becca said. Her voice was doing the thing it did, the thing that had been making Zara forgive her since their first year of law school. I'm so sorry, Zara. How long has he been watching me? Zara asked. Becca's silence was longer than any answer would have been. That evening, a package arrived at Zara's apartment. No return address. A single file. Inside, every case she had ever worked. Every client she had ever represented. Every ethical corner she had ever cut in the service of someone whose money was large enough to make the cutting feel like a technicality rather than a choice. Documented with the precision of someone who had been building a file for long enough that the file was complete. And a note, in handwriting that was precise and angular, and did not waste space. Asterisk, you knew about the money. You always knew. Now you work for someone who is honest about where it comes from. Asterisk. Zara sat on her kitchen floor with the file in her lap and the note in her hand and let herself understand, fully, completely, without the management she usually applied to difficult information, what the last 48 hours actually meant. She had been watched. She had been chosen. The dare had not been a dare. The 6 words had been an audition. And she had passed. She went to him. Not because the file left her no choice, though it left her no choice, but because the attorney in her had identified the question she needed answered before she could make any decision that meant anything. She was a person who operated in information. Uncertainty, for her, was not a state she managed. It was a state she resolved. He received her in a building whose address belonged to one of his holding companies, a floor that had been converted into something that functioned as both office and residence with the specific, unhurried luxury of a person who did not separate work from life because work had always been his life. No visible security. No performed indifference. Just space that had been designed by someone who understood that power expressed as excess was power that felt defensive. This space did not feel defensive. He told her what he was. Not in the euphemistic language of men who wanted credit for honesty while preserving deniability. Not in the legal register that criminals adopted when they sat across from attorneys and needed to maintain plausible distance from the things they were describing. In the flat, factual register of someone who had stopped caring about other people's reactions to the truth at some point so far in the past that he no longer remembered when the stopping had happened. Korean organized crime. The Western operations, logistics, finance, real estate that did not appear in public filings because it was held in structures that were designed not to appear. The legitimate businesses that were not covers but genuine enterprises. They funded, insulated, and occasionally absorbed the other kind, and over time the proportions had shifted in ways that created a question he could not answer from the inside. I'm not asking you to help me do anything illegal, he said. His voice had the same quality it carried everywhere, level, unhurried, utterly without the performance of certainty that insecure people produced when they wanted to seem certain. The real kind was quieter. I'm asking you to help me become the kind of person who doesn't need to. Zara looked at him across the space between them. She had spent 6 years looking at men who were describing themselves in conference rooms and boardrooms and depositions, and she had learned to read the specific gap between what they were saying and what they were. The gap was always there. In the hesitations, in the word choices, in the things they left out because they assumed no one would think to look for them. She could not find the gap in Kwon Dae-young. That was the most alarming thing so far. The logistics company. she said. The acquisition? Is that real? Yes. It's one piece of a larger project. A 5-year project. He moved to the window, the kind of movement that was not restlessness but thought, made physical. The goal is to move the bulk of operations into legitimate enterprise. To exit the structures that require maintenance, of a kind I no longer want to perform. You want out. I want to build something that doesn't require what I built it with. He turned back to her. I have been looking for a specific kind of legal mind for 2 years. Not someone who will look the other way, those are available and cheap. Someone who will look directly at the ugliest version of a situation and find the legal path through it. Someone who doesn't flinch from complexity. A pause. Someone who has already demonstrated they can hold 2 irreconcilable realities in their heads simultaneously and function. You're describing half the M&A attorneys in this city. I'm describing you, he said. The 6 words you said to me were the most accurate thing anyone has said to me about myself in 3 years. His eyes held hers. I have been waiting for someone who would. It turns out the waiting was the thing they said to me about. She held his gaze. Steadily. Not looking away first this time. He reached into the desk and produced a second file. Slid it across the surface toward her. She opened it. And sat with what she found inside for a very long time. Her managing partner. The man who had hired her at 22, who had championed her partnership track, who had called her first thing Saturday morning with the voice of someone managing bad news carefully. He had been funneling client settlement funds through a shell company for 4 years. The trail traced to a man currently under federal investigation for wire fraud. 3 of Zara's cases, 3 wins she was still proud of, 3 arguments she had built from the architecture of pure legal reasoning, had been won because opposing counsel had been compromised in ways she had not known to look for. The career she had built had a foundation she hadn't known existed. I didn't know, she said. The words came out flat. She was not asking him to believe her. She was stating a fact that needed to exist in the room. I know, he said. His voice had not changed. That's why I'm telling you instead of using it. The distinction, small, enormous, settled into the space between them. What do you want from me? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. The specific quiet of someone who had not needed to ask for anything in so long that the asking had to be reconstructed from older parts of themselves. I want you to help me build something clean, he said. And I want to know if you can do that without knowing whether I deserve it. She left the building and walked. This was what she did when she needed to think, when the problem was too large for the apartment, too complex for a desk, when she needed the city's specific, indifferent enormousness to provide the scale that the problem required. She walked until her feet remembered the routes she'd walked in her first year in the city, when she was 23 and newly barred and still naive enough to believe that the sharpness of her mind was a sufficient map for everything she would encounter. The professional case for walking away from Kwon Dae-yum was unassailable. He was what he was. The file on her firm complicated her ability to report him without implicating herself in a structure she hadn't built but had benefited from, and she was honest enough with herself, walking through the city in the specific way of someone conducting a deposition of their own conscience, to admit that the benefit had been real. She had won cases. She had built a reputation. Some part of that architecture rested on ground she hadn't laid herself. The professional case for accepting was equally unassailable. He was offering her what every attorney in her position quietly wanted and almost never got, a client whose problems were genuinely complex enough to require her at full capacity. Not the performed complexity of a corporation finding legal cover for a decision it had already made. Real complexity, the kind where the outcome wasn't predetermined and the law was a map rather than a costume. The problem was that neither of these cases was the real one. She found the park without intending to. A small thing, tucked between 2 towers in the financial district, one of those urban afterthoughts that existed because a developer's plan had needed green space to pass review and had installed the minimum required. She had eaten lunch here in her first year, when she was still eating lunch, before the years compressed into something that happened at desks and in cars and sometimes in conference rooms between the end of one meeting and the beginning of the next. She sat on the bench and thought about 6 words. You look like you're waiting for someone who's never coming. She had said them as a dare. Becca had scripted them as an insult, the kind of thing that sounded clever and landed like a small blade, designed to make someone feel slightly less in possession of their own evening. But she had looked at him first. Just for a fraction of a second. Just long enough to take the target reading that her depositions had made automatic. And she had seen something that the insult was coding, something the words were aimed at without knowing they were aimed at it. Not loneliness. Something older and more specific. The particular isolation of a person who had been powerful for so long that everyone in their vicinity had organized themselves around the management of that power. People reading him, performing for him, angling toward him, and the room was simultaneously full of people and entirely empty of anyone willing to say the thing that was simply, plainly true. She had said it because it was true. She had seen it in the fraction of a second she had allowed herself to actually look, and the truth of it had come out before the dare had time to fully form, so that the dare was really just the delivery mechanism for an observation she had made and released without deciding to. And he had looked at her like it was the first true thing anyone had said to him in years. She sat with that for a long time. Then she stood up and went back. He was at the window when she arrived, looking at the city in the way she was beginning to recognize as characteristic, not the possessive gaze of someone surveying what they owned, but the specific weariness of continued, unshared responsibility. The look of someone who had been carrying something alone for so long that the carrying had become the posture. I have one question, she said, before I make any decision that means anything. He turned. Why? She asked. Not why me. Why this? Why go legitimate? You have what you have. The structures are in place. It runs. She held his gaze. Why change it? He was quiet. The specific quiet of someone who had been asked the question they had been carrying and had not yet found the formulation that would make the answer bearable to say out loud. Because everything I built, he said finally, I built alone. In the way I built it, the only way I knew, it doesn't survive me. It just continues. Without me. Like a machine that doesn't know its operator is gone. He looked back at the city. I want to build something that can be handed to the next person. Something that doesn't require. He stopped. Zara finished it. Someone like you to maintain it. Yes, he said simply. The room between them was quiet for a moment that was not uncomfortable. For the first time since she had walked across the bar, it felt like a conversation rather than a negotiation. You've been in rooms full of people your whole career, she said. Not accusatory. Just observational, the same register she'd used to name the truth on Friday night. And you've been alone in all of them. He looked at her. Not the measuring look. Not the cataloging look. Something else. Something she didn't have a professional category for. Yes, he said again. She took the case. Not as he had presented it, because she was a corporate attorney, and she would not pretend the complications didn't exist any more than she pretended they didn't exist for any other client. She negotiated the terms herself, sitting across the desk from him with the draft in front of her, and the specific focus of someone who had been told the stakes and intended to write a contract that reflected them. Full disclosure of any prior legal exposure affecting her representation. Independent oversight of the legitimization process. Her absolute right to withdraw if any new illegality emerged that she had not been informed of in advance. She slid the draft across the desk. He read it. Asked 2 clarifying questions, specific, precise, the questions of someone who had read contracts before and understood that the questions that mattered were never the broad ones. And then he signed. No objections. No counterterms. No negotiation of the provisions she had expected him to push back on. She understood, in the moment of watching him sign, that he had been waiting for someone to set conditions. That the entire machinery of his world had been running without conditions for so long that the existence of them, the simple, professional fact of them, was itself something he had needed. The work began the following week. It was the hardest she had ever done. Not because it was illegal. It wasn't, or rather she ensured it wasn't, which was itself the work, but because it was genuinely complex in the way the best work was complex. It required her to hold multiple irreconcilable realities in her head simultaneously, to find the legal path through situations that had been designed to have no legal path. To be at every moment the most informed person in the room and to present the information in ways that moved people who had spent their careers resisting exactly the kind of moves she was making. She was, in short, working at full capacity for the first time in her career. She didn't notice it happening at first. The other thing, the thing that had nothing to do with contract law and everything to do with the 6 words. She noticed it the way you notice weather changing, incrementally, then all at once. Kwan's world was full of people managing him, reading him, performing the version of themselves that was most useful to him. His staff moved around him with the specific, calibrated efficiency of people who had learned that surprise was a liability, and that the safest form of competence was the invisible kind. Zara was not invisible. She had never learned how to be invisible. She had tried, in the early years of her career, in the boardrooms that had been designed before anyone who looked like her was expected to sit in them. She had tried to make herself smaller, quieter, more like the background. It had not worked, not because she was incapable of it, but because the work required the things she was attempting to suppress, and she had eventually made the pragmatic decision that the work mattered more. So she said the true things. In meetings where everyone else was saying the useful things, the carefully managed things, the things that preserved their position while advancing the interests they had been sent to advance. She said the true things in the flat, observational register she had used on Friday night across the bar, and she watched his face do the thing that no one else in his world seemed to make it do. It recalibrated. Not dramatically. In the millimeter register that she had learned to read, the tiny, involuntary adjustments of a face that is receiving something it has not been offered in a very long time. Becca called 3 months in. Zara did not answer. She did not block the number either. Some debts were paid by waiting to discover whether they were still owed, and that question required time that was not yet available. On a Friday night 6 months after the dare, Kwan took her to Cypher. The same bar. The same amber lighting. The same jazz that cost more per set than most people made in a week. The same geometry. But she was beside him when they arrived, not across the room, not calculating the distance, not performing the specific courage of someone who was about to say something to a stranger. They ordered without ceremony. The staff greeted him by name. Not the careful, eyes-down acknowledgement of Friday night. By name, with the ease of familiarity, the specific ease of people in a room where power no longer felt like a threat. Zara looked at him. At the bar he had occupied for 40 minutes before she walked across it. At the man who had been sitting in the client's chair when she pushed open the conference room door. At the person who had told her, in the flat factual register she had come to recognize as his most honest one, that everything he built alone. He was not looking at the door. "You don't look like you're waiting for someone who's never coming," she said. He turned to look at her. Something moved behind his eyes, the same something she had been watching move there for 6 months, the thing she had not had a professional category for, and had stopped needing one. Recognition. The specific, unhurried quality of someone who had been seen accurately and was, for once, not deciding how to manage it. "No," he agreed. "I don't." He lifted his glass. She lifted hers. They drank without toasting, because some things did not need a ceremony to be true. Zara set her glass down and looked at the bar, at the amber light and the jazz in the room that had recalibrated around a single moment 6 months ago, and understood something she had not yet fully put into words. The 6 words had not been a dare. They had been the most accurate thing she had ever said to anyone. Said to the right person, in the right room, at the exact moment when accuracy was the rarest and most necessary thing in the world. She would say them again. Without being dared.